I'm Emily Parker, 32 years old, and until yesterday I thought I'd hit the jackpot. I'd just closed a $15 million 0-cent exit on my fintech platform, a dream I'd chased since my first lines of code. By late afternoon, I was signing the papers to transfer $5 million 0 cents in cash as a deposit on a beachfront home in Malibu, my sanctuary after years of relentless hustle. I could already picture myself strolling through the oak front gate, the Pacific waves glittering under the California sun, the salty breeze teasing my hair. This morning, before I'd even taken a sip of my freshly brewed latte, an email from my lawyer's office shattered that vision. It read, "Your mother and brother are temporarily unreachable, and the entire $5 million 0 cents deposit has disappeared. No explanation, no apologies, just a cold statement. We will reconnect when circumstances allow." My heart sank and a million questions raced through my mind. How could they vanish so completely, and with my life savings in tow? I grew up in Seattle, in a modest 2-bedroom on Beacon Hill, where the rain felt as much a part of life as breathing. My father, John Parker, worked as a systems engineer at Boeing, bringing home about $85,000 0 cents a year. My mother, Sarah, was a school secretary earning closer to $42,000 0 cents, but she saved nearly 20% of every paycheck in a high-yield online account, about $700 0 cents a month, so that my younger brother Alex and I could go to college without drowning in debt. Our home was never lavish: linoleum floors in the kitchen, hand-me-down furniture, and backyard blackberry bushes Dad planted so we'd always have a weekend snack. But there was abundance in laughter, in family game nights, and in my mother's hearty breakfasts of blueberry pancakes whenever I had a big math test. She'd line up 6 fluffy cakes, drizzle them with maple syrup, and tell me, "Brain food, Em." From the earliest age I can remember, my identity was wrapped up in numbers and code. By 13, I'd built my first rudimentary website, an online neighborhood bulletin, using free hosting and borrowed HTML tutorials. My father watched me solder LEDs for a DIY computing project and joked, "At this rate, you'll have your own startup before college." Meanwhile, Alex, 3 years younger, was a champion Lego builder. He spent hours constructing intergalactic spaceships, insisting one day he'd be an astronaut or at the very least a toy designer. Money was always present, if not as abundance, then as possibility. In high school, my guidance counselor told me the average student loan debt for University of Washington graduates was approaching $28,000 0 cents. My heart sank at the thought, but my mother reassured me. "We'll make sure you can graduate with 0 loans, Em." True to her word, by the time I left for college, she'd amassed nearly $30,000 0 cents in that savings account. Alex's college fund sat at $10,000 0 cents, earmarked for community college courses if he chose that route. I enrolled at UW for computer science on a half-tuition scholarship and supplemented with 3 summer internships. First at a local credit union, then at a small cybersecurity firm, and ultimately at a fintech startup in Bellevue that paid me $6,500 0 cents a summer. Every dollar I earned, I funneled into a Roth IRA and a rainy day fund, convinced that compound interest, 7% average annual return, would one day catapult me toward financial freedom. Alex, on the other hand, took a different path. After high school, he worked part-time at a GameStop, saving about $1,200 0 cents a year from minimum wage shifts to fund his gaming rig. He was content to stream video games to a small audience, 500 to 600 followers, while finishing an associate's degree in graphic design. He always teased me, "Em, you're the money brain, I'm the creative one." But beneath his easygoing smile, I sensed he felt pressure to keep up. Our parents' modest nest egg allowed me to bootstrap my first startup, a peer-to-peer lending platform. Straight out of college, I poured $25,000 0 cents of savings into development and hired 2 classmates for equity. Mia Johnson, an exceptional UX designer, and Carlos Wynn, a back-end wizard. We launched in January 2018 on a shoestring budget of $50,000, 0 cents, including $15,000. 0 cents from my personal savings and a $10,000 0 cents small business loan at 6.8% interest. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad watched our progress with guarded excitement. At Thanksgiving 2018, Dad announced he'd refinanced our home to tap into $40,000, 0 cents of equity, half of which he gifted me to expand marketing. I used that to run targeted Facebook ads, boosting user acquisition by 40% over 3 months. Alex, for his part, balked at the risk. He'd recently scraped together $3,500 0 cents for a designer graphics tablet, arguing it was more certain than speculative equity. Through every milestone, our first 1,000 users in June 2018, our Series A pitch deck in February 2019, hitting $1 million 0 cents in loan originations by December 2019. I would call home. "We've just hit 2,000 active borrowers," I'd tell Mom, her voice bright with pride. Dad would pipe in, "Your coding is paying off, kiddo." Alex would smile on the speakerphone and say, "Great work, Em. Let me know if you need a new logo or something." Yet I noticed he rarely offered more than that. His support felt polite but distant. I chalked it up to sibling rivalry, me climbing the ladder faster, him watching from below. But every quarter end, when I tallied my compensation, about $90,000, 0 cents salary plus 0.5% equity vesting, I'd slide $2,000, 0 cents, into his account as a thank you bonus for being my sounding board. He always thanked me, saying, "This will cover my semester books." I'd smile and think, "Yeah, textbooks cost nearly $1,200, 0 cents, a semester." By early 2021, our platform served 10,000 borrowers and facilitated $50 million, 0 cents, in loans. Revenue hovered around $5 million, 0 cents, annually, with net margins near 18%. We'd just closed a $5 million 0 cents seed round led by a Los Angeles VC firm. That spring, Alex confessed to me over dinner he felt stuck at GameStop, worried he wouldn't find his calling. I encouraged him to join our marketing team, offered him a $48,000 0 cents salary. He hesitated, then said, "I'll think about it." I never pushed. Life felt full. Each Christmas our family gathered at a rented chalet in Lake Tahoe. We'd ski by day. Dad tore down the slopes at 80 miles per hour. Mom skied cautiously, and Alex and I took turns wiping out in powder. We'd reconvene by the fireplace. Mom would brew cocoa, Dad would light the gas logs, and I'd demo our latest app feature on my tablet. Alex would watch, nodding approvingly, and I'd catch a flicker of pride in his eyes, until the next morning, when he'd slip away to tinker with his own side project, an indie game concept he wouldn't let me see. In hindsight, that December 2021 trip was the calm before the storm. We toasted with champagne. Cristal $200, 0 cents a bottle, and I felt gratitude swell. My parents reveled in my success. "You've made those savings multiply 100-fold, Mom said. You're living proof of that old adage, money can't buy happiness, but it sure buys freedom." Alex raised his glass quietly, and I assumed he was just hungover from our New Year's Eve party, not sensing the quiet tension between us. It wasn't until I flew to San Francisco in April 2022 to pitch a strategic partnership that I picked up the first real sign of strain. I called Dad from my Uber on Market Street. He answered, his voice tight. "Emily, did you see the notice? Our refinance rate just jumped to 4.5%. I sighed. "I'll transfer $5,000 0 cents today to cover the extra monthly payment." He thanked me, and I felt warmth that I could protect them. But when I texted Alex to let him know I'd sent a bonus, his reply came back hours later. "Got it, thanks. No exclamation point, no love you." That evening, I watched the Golden Gate Bridge's lights shimmer against the bay, wondering if my family's bond was fraying under the weight of money and ambition. I dismissed it, told myself every successful woman encounters these trials. Yet a tiny knot of doubt nestled in my chest, waiting for the moment it would unfurl into something far harsher. And then came the day I transferred that $5 million 0 cents deposit for my Malibu home, blissfully naive that the same hands that once held my childhood would turn away with my life's savings. The trusting foundation we'd built, of shared sacrifices, of holiday joys, of mutual dreams, was about to crack in ways I never imagined. The day everything started feeling off began with a seemingly innocuous email. I was in my home office, floor-to-ceiling windows spilling morning light onto my standing desk, when I heard the familiar ping of my inbox. The sender was Alex P., but the subject line read simply, "Loan docs attached." My brow furrowed. Alex had never handled legal paperwork for me. That was strictly my lawyer's territory. Curious, I clicked it open and found a single PDF titled Mortgage Authorization, stamped with a date I didn't recognize, July 3, 2025. I'd already closed on the Malibu deposit 2 days earlier, so why did this document suggest I'd authorized a secondary lien on the property for $2,500,000, 0 cents? Heart pounding, I forwarded it to Lauren, my corporate attorney in Los Angeles, adding, "Did my brother get mixed up in this somehow?" 15 minutes later, her reply arrived. "Emily, I see no record of this file in our system. No signature, no notary stamp. Be cautious." Cautious wasn't nearly strong enough. I dialed Alex's number. His ringtone, a cheerful synth beat, felt discordant against the pressure building in my chest. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey Em, what's up?" he said, bright and curious. "Did you send me mortgage paperwork today?" I tried to sound casual. He hesitated. No. Why would I do that?" I held my breath. "It says here you did." There was a pause. "Maybe it's a scam?" he offered. "Maybe," I muttered before hanging up, but something about his defensiveness didn't sit right. That afternoon, I drove to our old neighborhood credit union, the place where my first internship taught me to spot fraudulent transactions faster than any bank's automated alerts. I asked the teller to show me recent activity on the joint family emergency account Alex and I had opened years ago. The screen flickered, then revealed 2 outgoing wire transfers of $1,200,000, 0 cents each, both processed at 8:03 a.m., the same exact minute I'd opened that email. My pulse raced. I copied the transaction IDs and called the fraud department hotline, but they informed me only that the transfers had cleared and were already offshore. That night I lay awake in bed, moonlight tracing patterns on my ceiling fan as I scrolled through our shared digital photo album. There we were at Lake Tahoe, grinning in matching ski jackets. There he was clutching his graphics tablet like a trophy. Beneath each image he'd slapped heart emojis. Yet then I stumbled on an old message thread I'd forgotten. On December 15, 2021, he'd texted, "Psst, did you ever update that GPS tracker you slipped into my suitcase, asking for a friend?" GPS tracker? That was my contingency plan for my cash deposit, an invisible safety net in case someone tried to move it. Why would he ask? Driven by instinct, I pulled up our shared calendar and cross-referenced his tagged locations: Malibu, Seattle, Milan, and oddly, Dubai. On June 24, there was a booking for a one-way economy ticket to Dubai costing $4,200, 0 cents, issued under his name. Alex had never talked about Dubai or expensive travel. Something big was happening without my knowledge. The next morning, I went to his studio apartment in Bellevue. He opened the door in baggy sweatpants, coffee still clinging to his lips. I held up my phone. "Care to explain this?" I asked, showing him the flight itinerary and wire transfer details. His eyes flicked away. I was thinking of a vacation, he said, voice flat. A vacation to Dubai funded by $1,200,000, 0 cents in newly wired funds, I pressed. His shoulders slumped. You said I could have a share for all my support, he mumbled. I needed it, okay? I thought you'd understand. Understand? I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. I said bonus at my discretion. I never authorized wire transfers of millions out of our account. He ran a hand through his hair, jaw clenched. You're making this harder than it needs to be. For a moment, I saw the little brother who'd built Lego Star Destroyers in our backyard, eager, innocent. But that look vanished in an instant. Greed and secrecy had replaced that boyhood spark. My mind spun. If Alex had planned this silently, what would he do next? I forced myself to breathe and said, I'll be securing my assets. I suggest you come clean to Lauren. Immediately. His shoulders tensed, a storm of anger, fear, and guilt flickering across his face. As I left, a knot of dread settled in my gut. This was no longer a misunderstanding or an external scam. It was an inside job. The first tremor in an earthquake I never saw coming. When I walked into Lauren's downtown office the next morning, I thought I was prepared for any revelation. I wasn't. The moment she slid the thick envelope across her mahogany desk, the color drained from my face. Inside were bank records, flight itineraries, and a single damning image, a grainy screenshot of Alex boarding a private jet in Dubai, his name scrawled in the manifest next to a Parker Family Trust account number. I've never seen anything like this, Lauren said, her tone measured but solemn. He's not just misappropriating funds. He's hiding behind a shell corporation, laundering money through offshore accounts. I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. My own brother, using our family's name as a shield. My pulse throbbed so violently I thought it might crack my temples. Later that afternoon, I confronted Alex at the Parker family's lakeside cabin, a place of childhood campfires and summer swim meets, now tainted by betrayal. He met me at the dock, arms crossed, wind tugging at his hair. Emily, he said quietly, I guess you saw? I saw, I echoed, my voice brittle. Millions wired out, private jet flights, shell companies, how could you? He inhaled deeply as if steeling himself. I did it for us, I laughed, the sound hollow. Explain how laundering my deposit and disappearing to Dubai is for us. His expression twisted with frustration. You've always controlled every decision, every dollar I earned. I thought, maybe if I took this into my own hands, I could carve out my own legacy, get you to notice me as more than just Emily's little brother. Rage flared inside me, burning out any remaining doubt. By stealing from me? My words were a whisper, but they felt like shrapnel. He met my gaze. I gave you everything. My undivided loyalty, emotional support, those heart emojis you love so much. You never gave me a title, an equity slice, or even a proper job offer after promising. My heart clenched. I offered you a salaried position at $48,000, 0 cents a year, more than triple your GameStop income. You declined. He looked away, jaw clenched. I didn't want a handout, I wanted respect. Respect doesn't come from betrayal, I said, taking a step closer. I trusted you with my life's work, my family's sacrifices, every sleepless night I spent coding late into the night, and you repaid me by turning my own safety net into your personal ATM. Alex's eyes glistened with anger and something else, perhaps regret. You have no idea how small I felt, Em. Every update notification on your phone made me shrink a little more. I swallowed hard. I was proud of you. I texted you bonuses, invited you to Thanksgiving dinners, asked for your design help. I thought that meant something. It did, he whispered. but it wasn't enough. Tears stung my eyes, though it wasn't sadness but fury that welled up. So you decided to escalate. You replaced my real deposit with counterfeit bills, used a tracked briefcase to fool me, and vanished with my money. You risked our parents' credit, jeopardized their home's refinance, and almost ruined everything I worked for. He flinched, as if struck. The wind off the lake whipped past us, carrying memories of bungalow sleepovers, marshmallow roasts, and midnight swims. In that moment, the betrayal cut deeper than any personal slight. It desecrated the foundation of our family. "I'm sorry," he said, the words almost lost beneath the lapping of waves. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to prove you matter," I finished for him. "Well, congratulations. You've proven you matter now, enough to put you behind bars." His face went pale. I'm filing criminal charges," I said, swallowing hard to keep my voice steady. "We're bringing both civil suits and the FBI. You used shell entities. I'll have comprehensive forensic accounting done. You'll answer for every penny." He closed his eyes, a single breath rasping out. "Please." "Please what?" My eyes blazed. "Please beg me? Please admit you're scum?" He opened his eyes, pain etched into every line of his face. "Please, let me make it right." I took a step back, my heart splitting in two. The boy who once shared my ski jacket and sat beside me at school plays had become a stranger. "There's no making this right," I said, my voice shaking. "Only consequences." As I turned to leave, Alex called out, voice cracking, "Emily!" But I didn't look back. The betrayal was complete, and in the distance, the cabin's windows reflected shards of late afternoon sun like fractured trust. I walked away, the weight of embittered loyalty heavy on my shoulders, knowing that the path ahead would be defined by confrontation, restitution, and the hardest lesson of all. Blood doesn't guarantee fidelity. I stumbled away from the dock, the late afternoon sun paling behind a gathering of dark clouds. My legs wavered beneath me as I made my way up the narrow path to the cabin's front porch. Each step felt like wading through molasses, impossible to accelerate, impossible to stop. By the time I reached the threshold, my vision was swimming with tears I'd fought so hard to contain. The front door creaked shut behind me, and I leaned against it, knees buckling. I collapsed onto the welcome mat, the coarse fibers scratching at my palms as I clawed for purchase. My breath caught in my throat, tight, ragged, as if my lungs themselves were rebelling. I pressed my forehead to the wood, as though I could fuse my panic to its grain and find some stable anchor. A mounting weight pressed on my chest, the same crushing sensation I'd once felt during a panic attack in college when an entire server of code crashed the night before finals. But this was worse. This wasn't just a bug I could patch or a deadline I could extend. This was my family, fracturing in real time. I closed my eyes and tried to slow my racing heart. In, out, but the rhythm refused to settle. My mind spun through a cyclone of images, the grainy jet blue manifest, Alex's hollow apology, the shells of counterfeit bills he'd left behind, and then the memories came rushing in, the times he'd perched on the arm of my sofa, cheering me on at pitch events, the nights we'd share popcorn for horror movie marathons, the childish whispers beneath blankets as we plotted a future where we both shone. None of it seemed real anymore. My hands shook as I pushed off the door and slid down to the floor, curling into a fetal position. The old hardwood was cold and uneven against my back. I wrapped my arms around my knees and let myself cry. At first it was silent, no sound but the faint drip of the cabin's leaky faucet somewhere beyond the kitchen walls. Then the tears came in waves, my sobs rising in volume until they echoed between the walls. "Why?" I whispered into my own knees. "Why, Alex?" My voice cracked, ricocheting through my chest. I imagined the words reaching him, how I longed for a fragment of remorse, for him to hold me and tell me it was a terrible mistake, but I knew he wouldn't. He was already behind bars of his own guilt and fear. Memories of my mother flooded in next. I saw her gentle hands ruffling my hair after every code-crunching all-nighter. The way she'd slip a $20.00 bill into my purse with a wink and tell me to treat myself. I pictured Dad's proud grin the day I graduated debt-free, his eyes misting as he handed me my diploma. Their love had been the bedrock beneath everything I built. And now it felt like that bedrock had sprung a leak, cracking under pressure. My phone buzzed in my pocket and buzzed again, a blaring, intrusive hammer striking my raw nerves. I didn't reach for it. I didn't care. Call it Mom, call it Dad, call it Lauren, call it 100 banks freezing my assets. I pressed my cheek to the floorboards, seeking solace in distance. At some point, my chest unclenched enough for a shallow breath. I forced my fingers to unfold from around my knees and crawled toward the kitchen doorway. The floor was littered with the detritus of last night's storm, a chipped coffee mug, a spilled napkin, and shards of something I couldn't name. My hand closed around the mug handle, the ceramic warm with last night's espresso, curdled and bitter. I lifted it to my lips and sipped. The liquid burned a path down my throat, awakening every nerve ending with regret. Bitterness pooled on my tongue, bitter as the realization that the safety net I'd so meticulously woven had been yanked away by the one person I trusted above all else. I stumbled to the living room and sank onto the sofa, wrapping the threadbare throw blanket around my shoulders. The cushions gave a sigh under my weight, as though mourning with me. I stared out the window at the shoreline, waves slapping against the rocks with primal fury. The ocean had always felt constant, indifferent to human strife, but now it mirrored my turmoil, relentless, churning, unforgiving. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny pulse still flickered, that ember of resilience I'd honed over years of startup rejections, venture capital pivots, and 3 a.m. coding marathons. But it was dim, buried beneath layers of guilt and grief. I closed my eyes, searching for that spark, but found only tears and trembling. Hours passed in a blur of desolate thoughts. I couldn't remember if the sun had set or if night had fallen. At some point, the cabin's single overhead light flickered on, as though sensing my need for illumination. I sat up, wiping my cheeks on the blanket's frayed edge. My mind felt fogged, but in the haze, a thought surfaced. I could not stay here, trapped by heartbreak and shame. I rose unsteadily and crossed back to the kitchen. In the cupboard, I found a half-empty bottle of bourbon, something Alex had smuggled in for game-themed drinking nights. My pulse quickened. I knew the risk of drowning my sorrows this way. The next morning I might wake to regret even deeper than this. Still, the urge was electric. I poured a stiff measure into a chipped tumbler and raised it to my lip. The liquid flame scorched my throat, and I welcomed the sear. For a few seconds my world tilted into sharp focus, and then the despair resumed its slow creep, heavier than before. I sank back against the counter, closing my eyes. "I can't do this," I whispered, emptiness swallowing my voice. The bourbon swished at the bottom of the glass. I clenched my jaw. I had allowed myself to unravel completely, crumbled underneath the weight of betrayal. And if I stayed here, I'd collapse entirely, consumed by a grief that threatened to hollow me out. I pressed my palms to the cool countertop, as though it might lend me its solidity. My mind snapped forward to tomorrow, the calls I'd have to make, the Franklin Templeton buyout on hold, the Malibu deal in limbo, my reputation teetering on ruin. The image of my lawyer's stern face, waiting for direction, rose to the surface. Lauren would demand decisions, asset freezes, legal filings, damage control, and I was barely functional. The whiskey's warmth faded into soreness in my belly. I set the glass down, tender-fingered, and drew in a shuddering breath. It was time to act, or to be lost. My thumb hovered over the screen lock on my phone. With a trembling breath, I flipped it open and tapped my mother's number. My heart pounded so fiercely I thought it would crack my ribs. "Mom?" My voice came out soft, raw. Pause. And then her gentle, worried tone. "Emily? What's wrong, honey?" I blinked back tears. "Everything's wrong." I sank onto a kitchen stool, bracing myself. "Alex? He stole the deposit. He wired the money to Dubai. He's laundering it through shell accounts." Silence. Then her voice, thick with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart." The dam broke. I cried into the phone, my mother's soft words washing over me. "We'll figure it out, together." For the first time since the betrayal, I felt something shift. A tremor of hope woven through the horror. I clung to each syllable, each promise. And in that fragile moment, I realized that reaching out was not a sign of weakness, but the first step toward reclaiming myself. The road ahead would be long, the wounds raw, but I would not let this collapse define me. My tears were an admission of loss, and also a cleansing, washing away the naivete that had left me vulnerable. I wiped my eyes, pressed the burner into action, and set a kettle to boil. I would call Lauren next. I would meet with accountants. I would chart a course through the wreckage of my own family. And though I could not see it yet, I knew that from this lowest point, I would rise. Because I had to. There was no other option. The morning light felt soft against my eyelids as my phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. For a moment I lay unmoving, letting the haze of yesterday's despair cling to me like a second skin. Then I remembered, there was work to be done. I muttered a quick thank you to the universe, rolled out of bed and slid into a crisp white blouse and tailored black slacks. 2 strong gulps of black coffee later, I was back in CEO mode, my pulse quickening not with panic but with purpose. First, I called Detective Rivera, my private investigator. "I need an updated ledger of every wire transfer from my accounts," I said, voice steady. "And GPS data on that briefcase tracker. Plus dig into any shell entities tied to the Parker family trust. Move fast." His chuckle over the line reminded me why I'd hired him. He knew how to turn chaos into actionable intelligence. By the time I hung up, the first tendrils of a plan were already winding their way through my mind. By 9:00 a.m. I was sitting in Lauren's corner office overlooking downtown LA. She greeted me with a stack of freshly printed injunctions, asset freeze orders, and subpoenas. "We'll lock down any remaining funds and stop Alex from siphoning another dollar," she said, laying out the paperwork like a general marshalling her troops. Side by side, we fine-tuned each document, tightening dates, clarifying language, sealing loopholes, until every line read like a steel trap. At 10:17 IMM, an electronic ding announced that the filings were complete. I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. Next stop was the Bellevue Credit Union, where our family emergency account was housed. The branch manager recognized me instantly. I placed the injunction order on the counter. Within minutes, the joint account was frozen, any new outgoing wires flagged for manual review. Then, on a call to my CFO, I rerouted all incoming revenue into a brand new trust account with multi-signatory approval and airtight digital encryption. By mid-afternoon, I'd quarantined my assets so securely that even the most determined cyber thief would break a sweat trying to crack them. That evening, I found myself back in Seattle, seated at the kitchen table of my parents' rented home. Dad was stirring gravy on the stove. Mom chopped vegetables, humming softly as if she were trying to lull the day's turmoil into peaceful submission. They enveloped me in hugs that felt like homecoming ceremonies, and for the first time since the betrayal, I didn't flinch. Over chicken pot pie, Dad said quietly, "We're proud of how you've handled this." Mom squeezed my hand. "You're not alone." Their words were simple, but they anchored me more firmly than any legal brief. Later that night, back in my temporary Airbnb, I drafted my recovery and counter-strike plan. In bullet points, I laid out every next step. Complete the forensic audit. Coordinate with Dubai's financial crime unit. assemble a public relations task force, pursue civil claims against every shell company in Alex's web, and perhaps most alien to my former self, commit to personal self-care, therapy appointments, digital detox blocks, and proper sleep. Typing therapy felt odd, like adding an unfamiliar spice to my life, but I booked the session anyway. It was a promise to myself I would emerge not just stronger, but wiser. As I shut my laptop, I noticed the chipped bourbon glass tucked behind a stack of books. I picked it up, swirled the bitter dregs, and tipped them down the sink. No more drowning sorrows. Tomorrow I'd brief Dubai authorities. I'd watch Alex's world contract under the weight of international subpoenas. And tonight, for the first time in days, I slept without guilt or fear, anchored by strategy, buoyed by support, and lit by a spark of resilience that refused to be extinguished. By dawn the next morning, I was already on a flight to Dubai. I'd ditched the chipped bourbon glass at my Airbnb the night before, determined that wallowing in despair wouldn't recover my life savings. As the plane climbed, I reviewed the dossier on Alex's offshore network, shell corporations in the Caymans, nominee directors in Cyprus, and a tangle of bank accounts scattered across Europe and Asia. My goal felt audacious but clear: expose every thread of his operation, seize control of the funds, and engineer a public reckoning that would leave him with nothing but consequences. Touching down in Dubai at 8:00 a.m. local time on June 28, 2025, I navigated customs with court-stamped subpoenas in hand. At the Dubai Financial Services Authority, I met Fatima, an Emirati officer whose crisp professionalism matched my urgency. Over marble countertops, I presented the evidence: transaction timelines, IP address trails, the private jet manifest screenshot, and insisted on immediate asset freezes. To my relief, she assembled a task force on the spot and promised expedited action. Outside the DFSA building, emails from my private investigator confirmed fresh GPS pings on that tracked briefcase, now coursing between Antwerp and Geneva. And I felt the first real shift in momentum. Later that day, in a nondescript office in Jumeirah Lake Towers, I met Tariq, the lead analyst from a boutique cybersecurity firm I'd enlisted. He'd traced the phishing email used to upload the fake mortgage authorization PDF back to a proxy server in Kiev, proof that Alex's plot was part of a far more sophisticated international fraud. By the time I flew back to LA that afternoon, the pieces were falling into place: DFSA freeze orders, the Kiev leads, and a pending Interpol notice for Alexander Parker and his nominee directors. Arriving at the courthouse in a midnight suit, I watched as Judge Hernandez granted our motions in full. Assets stayed frozen, contempt penalties loomed for any breaches, and a follow-up hearing was scheduled 4 weeks out. Reporters snapped photos, but I maintained a calm, determined composure. No drama, only facts. That night, on a video call with Detective Rivera and Tariq, we finalized our next moves: reverse DNS mapping on the Kiev proxy, live surveillance of Alex's Seattle rental, and real-time alerts for any shell company activity. By June 30, every jurisdiction from Geneva to Luxembourg had frozen holdings tied to Summerside Holdings Ltd. And the Parker Family Trust. Interpol had issued red notices for 3 nominee directors, and correspondent banks worldwide flagged suspicious activity reports. In a press briefing broadcast live from LA, I stood beside my lawyer and a DFSA representative, laying out the story of a fintech founder who turned familial betrayal into a cross-border campaign for justice. The resulting headlines: fintech CEO outsmarts fraudulent scheme by family member, and global asset freeze secured in high-profile money laundering case, felt like vindication not only of my strategy, but of my resilience. That evening, back by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Malibu penthouse, I let myself reflect on how far I'd come. The place I once saw as a sanctuary now symbolized both my vulnerability and my victory. A secure message from Fatima confirmed that all assets were frozen and Interpol had been notified. The network Alex had woven into a fortress was now his own cage, In that moment I realized that I had not only turned the tables on him but also discovered an unbreakable resolve within myself, a strength that would guide me as I rebuilt not just my finances but my entire legacy. While orchestrating my cross-continental counterstrike, a seemingly small detail emerged that would prove pivotal: the role of my childhood friend and former roommate Jess Alvarez. Jess and I met during my sophomore year at UW when we were paired in a dorm roommate lottery. She was studying behavioral psychology, always carrying a well-worn notebook filled with personality profile sketches of everyone she met. At the time, I thought her hobby quirky, but I soon realized it was a rare gift. In late May, 2 weeks before Alex vanished with my deposit, Jess sent me a text. Tip: something's off with your bro's vibe, he's too smooth lately. I dismissed it, chalking her instincts up to overactive pattern seeking, but after the fake mortgage PDF landed in my inbox, I dug out her original message and called her in a panic. Jess, what did you notice? I demanded. His tone, she said softly. Remember how he used to joke and add emojis? Lately, every text from him read like he was reading from a script. No pauses, no hesitation, no real humor. Intrigued, I forwarded her 3 weeks' worth of Alex's text history. 20 minutes later, she returned a report: a statistically significant decline in sentiment variance and an uptick in directive language. Commands like send funds or confirm receipt instead of casual banter. She even flagged 2 messages where he'd accidentally CC'd another shell company email address. That insight became the spark for my cybersecurity team's deeper linguistic analysis. We trained a simple natural language speaking model on genuine Alex texts from 2019-2022 and compared them against the recent corpus. Within hours, the model flagged 7 high-probability authenticity messages that coincided with key wire transfer timestamps. Meanwhile, Jess leveraged her campus network to discreetly gather intel. A mutual acquaintance who worked at the graphics design firm where Alex had freelanced told Jess that Alex had suddenly purchased $8,500 worth of high-end animation software in mid-May, just before the fake PDF operation. He claimed it was for a passion project, but Jess's friend found it suspicious that Alex then spent 10 straight days locked in the office, refusing all social invitations. Armed with both behavioral data and these offhand observations, I presented a supplemental motion in court to expand our subpoenas to include metadata from Alex's graphic design account. The judge, impressed by the multidisciplinary evidence, legal records, GPS-tracked briefcase data, IP logs, and now linguistic profiling, granted the request. That expanded scope led investigators to uncover the proxy servers in Kyiv and the nominee director filings in Cyprus, accelerating the asset freeze by 48 hours. This side story underscores a critical lesson. In complex fraud schemes, human intuition often hints at patterns that raw data alone can't reveal. Jess's keen ear for behavioral shifts and her willingness to share seemingly minor observations turned out to be the linchpin in unmasking the full scope of Alex's betrayal. As I reflect on that collaboration, I realize how valuable it is to blend deep technical forensics with psychological insight. In the end, it wasn't just legal acumen or cybersecurity prowess that secured justice. It was a friend's observant hunch, backed by disciplined analysis, that helped me turn a trickle of clues into a flood of evidence. And for that I will always be grateful to Jess, the quiet architect of one of my case's most decisive pivots. The final blow came on a crisp Thursday morning, June 26, when the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed criminal charges against Alexander Parker for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. I learned of it over the phone with my mother, her voice trembling as she read me the press release. "He's been indicted in 3 federal districts," she said. "New York, California, and Florida." My heart pounded. This was the culmination of every subpoena, every freeze order, every encrypted data dump we'd forced into the open. I flew to D.C. that afternoon to meet with the assistant U.S. attorney handling the New York case. In a secure conference room in the Robert F. Kennedy building, I watched rows of classified exhibits scroll by on a large screen: intercepted emails, flagged bank transactions, travel logs, and forensic analyses of the counterfeit bills Alex had swapped for my real deposit. The lead prosecutor, a steely woman named Marisol Cheng, clicked through each slide with clinical precision. "Ms. Parker," she said, turning the screen to show Alex's signature on a Cyprus nominee director filing, "we've tied this paper trail from the Cayman shell companies back to you." He tried to distance himself with nominee addresses and forged documents, but the IRS's forensic accountants traced every dollar. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "What happens next?" "An arrest warrant is already out," Marisol replied. "We'll coordinate with the FBI. He should be in custody by morning." That night, I sat alone in my hotel room overlooking the Potomac, the city lights blurred under the rain-pelted window. For months, I'd been driven by strategy and purpose. Now, the weight of finality settled in. Tomorrow, my brother would be arrested. The person I'd once built Lego ships with, the one I'd walked to middle school auditions beside, would be handcuffed and led away. Morning arrived in a gray haze. I joined a small team at the FBI field office in Alexandria. Agents briefed me in a secure holding cell. Alex was holed up in a rental house in Capistrano Beach, California. The local U.S. Marshals Service had a tactical plan: a dawn raid to minimize risk, secure evidence, and take him into custody quietly. I flew back west, catching the first nonstop to L.A., my mind racing with every possible outcome. Would he surrender? Would he resist? What would I feel when I saw him in handcuffs? By 5:30 p.m. I was standing behind protective glass in the federal courthouse in Santa Ana, watching through a security monitor. In a small holding room, Alex was led in by 2 agents. He wore a rumpled gray suit, his face pale and drawn. In that moment, the crowd's hushed gasps and the soft click of handcuffs felt surreal, like watching someone else's story. Through the glass, our eyes met. He looked older, hollowed out. For a heartbeat, I saw the little brother who'd cheered me on at every pitch event. Then, the image shattered, replaced by the man who'd betrayed me. I forced myself to look away. Over the next 2 days, I attended preliminary hearings in 3 jurisdictions. In New York, the judge read the indictment: 14 counts of wire fraud totaling $7,200,000, 0 cents, money laundering conspiracy, and aggravated identity theft. In California, the focus was on the Malibu deposit scheme and the counterfeit bill swap. In Florida, the charges centered on misuse of investor funds in Summerside Holdings. Each courtroom laid bare a different facet of his operation, and each time, I felt the finality of accountability settling in. Between hearings, reporters pressed me for comments. I stuck to a brief statement. I appreciate the professionalism of the DOJ, FBI, and international partners in uncovering the full scope of this scheme. My focus remains on repairing the harm caused to my family, my company, and our investors. I refused to be drawn into drama. My statements were factual and measured. The headlines shifted further: Parker heir arrested in international fraud ring, and fintech CEO's brother faces federal prison. On day 4, I flew back to Seattle for the civil hearing on asset recovery. In the courtroom packed with family, friends, and former neighbors, I watched as our forensic accountants presented detailed accounting of every dollar Alex had siphoned and spent. The judge approved the final settlement: full restitution of $5 million, 0 cents deposit plus interest and legal fees, to be paid from his frozen assets, and a punitive award of $1,200,000, 0 cents. It was a legal victory that would ensure I never bore the financial loss alone. That evening, I returned to the family home in which we'd grown up. Mom was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. Dad was at the table nursing a single scotch. I sat beside them, exhaustion etched into my bones. "He's going away for a long time," I said quietly, staring at the amber liquid in my hand. Mom reached over, brushing palm against palm. "Justice has a way of coming, Em." Dad nodded, eyes misting. "You did what was right. We're so proud of you." I exhaled, relief and grief mingling. My brother's downfall was complete. Criminal charges, seized assets, public disgrace, and a sentence that would separate him from the world he'd betrayed. That night I slept deeply for the first time in months. My dreams were not haunted by ledger lines or schematics, but by memories of our childhood canoe trips on Lake Union, paddles dipping in unison, laughter echoing across the water. In the morning I would step into my next chapter, rebuilding my company, my life, and perhaps one day, finding a way to forgive, but never to forget. The antagonist's downfall was not merely his arrest and financial ruin, but the collapse of the trust that had defined our bond. In its place, I was left with clarity, resilience, and the unshakable knowledge that even the deepest betrayal can be met with unwavering resolve, and ultimately justice. The courtroom drama is over, the indictments issued, and the last of Alex's frozen assets have been repatriated into my control. Yet the real resolution lies not in legal judgments or restitution checks, but in the quiet moments that followed. When I stepped off the stage of public spectacle and returned to the intimate space of family and self, a week after the final hearing in Seattle, I hosted a small dinner at my newly acquired Malibu home. It was sparsely attended, just my parents, Lauren, and Jess, yet it felt more significant than any grand gala celebration. We gathered around the dining table, its surface glass cold under our plates of grilled salmon and roasted asparagus. Outside, the Pacific's horizon glowed with sunset hues, the steady rhythm of waves a comforting counterpoint to the storm we'd weathered. My mother poured red wine for everyone, her hands steady as she circulated the carafe. Dad raised his glass in a soft toast. "To family," he said, "and to new beginnings." I felt a catch in my throat. I'd spent months defining my life in binary, betrayed versus victorious, victim versus victor. But tonight I realized life wasn't that simple. The loss of trust in my own brother left a deeper scar than any financial void, and rebuilding that trust, if it was even possible, would take time, vulnerability, and forgiveness, none of which could be legislated. Jess looked at me over her wineglass and smiled. "You did it, Em," she said. "You turned every setback into a step forward." Her words resonated. I'd learned that resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about learning from the fracture lines, integrating the pain into a stronger foundation. The dinner conversation drifted from light-hearted family anecdotes, Dad's new woodworking hobby, and Mom's experimental herb garden, to reflections on what we'd endured. Lauren offered practical advice for safeguarding future ventures, and Jess teased me about finally getting some rest. I laughed. A genuine full-bodied laugh that felt like the last piece of armor falling away. After dinner, I led my parents on a tour of the house. The living room's floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sea, and I paused at the balcony, breathing in the salty air. Here, I'd once imagined crafting a life of effortless ease. Instead, I'd had to fight for that life, expose my vulnerabilities, and confront betrayal head-on. Now, the view felt earned, a testament to the fact that even shattered dreams can be rebuilt into something more resilient. That night, in my private study, I revisited the journal entries I'd made during the crisis, notes written on sleepless nights, outlines of recovery strategies, and raw reflections on my emotional collapse. I read a passage from the first entry, written the morning after I discovered the theft. I feel hollow, as if my own blood has turned to ice. My eyes stung remembering that moment of utter despair. Then I flipped to the final entry before tonight's dinner. I've frozen his assets, but I've also thawed my heart to new possibilities. The evolution on those pages mirrored my journey from desolation to determination to acceptance. In the weeks that followed, I integrated the lessons of this ordeal into both my professional and personal life. I instituted more rigorous checks in our company for financial controls, ensuring multiple signatories on even the smallest wire transfers. I championed a psychological safety initiative for my employees, encouraging open communication and vigilance against internal threats. And I formalized a mentorship program, drawing on Jess's insights in behavioral profiling to help identify potential red flags in partner relationships. On the personal front, I committed to regular therapy sessions, honoring the promise I'd made to myself in that first recovery spark. Those sessions weren't easy. I confronted feelings of guilt, anger, and grief that I'd long bottled up behind my CEO facade. But with each session, I peeled back another layer of fear, rebuilding my capacity for trust and connection. I also rebalanced my work-life boundaries, instituting tech-free Sundays where I'd read on the balcony, practice yoga, or take long beach walks with my parents. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that forgiveness isn't a one-time event, but a process. Forgiving Alex didn't mean excusing his actions. It meant letting go of the bitterness that threatened to define my every thought. I wrote him a letter, not to be sent immediately, but to articulate the truth, the pain he'd caused, the breach of trust, and the accountability he now faced. In closing, I added, I hope someday you find your way back to integrity, and I hope we can find a way to be siblings again, however that may look. Today, as I sit at my desk drafting the prospectus for our next funding round, I carry all of these experiences with me. The numbers on the spreadsheet are important, revenue projections, growth metrics, market analysis, but no longer define my worth or security. Instead, I measure progress in resilience, integrity, and the strength of the relationships that surround me. My journey from betrayal to resolution taught me that money, even millions of dollars, cannot buy trust. Only transparency, accountability, and genuine care can foster loyalty. It taught me that power lies not in wealth alone, but in the willingness to face our deepest wounds and forge them into sources of renewal. And so, as I move forward, leading my company, nurturing my personal life, and embracing the unknown, I do so with a lesson etched into my very being, that true legacy is built not just on financial success, but on the courage to stand firm in our values, to rebuild when we break, and to keep our hearts open to the people who deserve them most.